15 years. Nobody in that courtroom knew the truth. Everyone knew Judge Fausto, cold, merciless, paralyzed. But before the wheelchair, before the bench, before the bitterness, he was Colonel Fausto, United States Army, Iraq War. He'd led men into battle, saved lives, earned medals, until an IED took his legs and his faith. And on that day in court, a 7-year-old girl was about to give him back both. But first, she had to make a promise, an impossible promise. "I'll make the judge walk, if you free my father." The words shot through the courtroom like an arrow, shattering the heavy silence. Lawyers laughed, reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks, family members shook their heads in disbelief. To everyone there, this was nothing more than a ridiculous scene. A thin girl in a simple dress and worn sneakers, promising to restore the legs of a man who'd lived in a wheelchair for 15 years. But nobody knew. Nobody knew who that judge really was, and nobody could imagine what that little girl's faith was about to change. This story didn't find you by accident. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, get ready to witness how a child's faith gave a war veteran back everything he'd lost. The courtroom was grim that morning. High ceilings, marble walls, everything cold, distant, unforgiving. People sat quietly, some curious, some hopeful, most just watching. In the defendant's chair sat a man, Ramiro Sandoval, hands in cuffs, eyes down. He was accused of fraud, a crime he didn't commit, but the evidence was against him. Beside him in the back row sat his little girl, Veronica. Only 7 years old, pale face, big brown eyes, an old blue dress. She watched her father silently. And at the bench, above everyone, sat Judge Marcus Fausto. He'd been in that wheelchair for 15 years. Nobody asked why anymore. Everyone knew, but nobody talked about it. His face was hard, deep lines, tired eyes. Nothing moved him anymore. He was known for harsh rulings. He showed no mercy, no emotion. People spoke of him with fear mixed with respect. But nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew who he'd been 20 years ago, somewhere in the desert, Iraq, 2004. Colonel Marcus Fausto was moving with his convoy that morning. Dust-covered Humvees, hot desert wind, his men beside him. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a leader. He'd trained young soldiers, guided them in combat, brought some of them home alive. "Colonel, path is clear," a voice crackled over the radio. Marcus nodded. "Move forward, stay sharp." But then everything changed. The explosion, light, sound, chaos, IED roadside bomb. Marcus's world went black in an instant. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. Germany. The last stop before transfer to Walter Reed. A doctor stood beside him. Sad face. "Colonel Fausto, we couldn't save your legs." Marcus stared at the ceiling. He felt nothing, just emptiness. That day, he didn't just lose his legs, he lost his faith. Now Judge Fausto sat at that bench, cold, hard, distant. For years, nobody knew his past. The transition from Colonel Fausto to Judge Fausto was quiet. Name change, new identity. Nobody asked questions. He was just known as the paralyzed judge. But that morning, in that courtroom, everything was about to change. Ramiro's lawyer stood up, made his defense, presented evidence. But Judge Fausto's face never changed. He listened, took notes, said nothing. Then the prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mr. Sandoval is guilty. We recommend 10 years. Silence. Judge Fausto was about to make his decision, and everyone knew. This judge showed no mercy. Ramiro lowered his head, his eyes filled. This was the end. He knew it. But then, from the back row, a voice rose, small, trembling, but determined. "Your Honor!" Everyone turned. Veronica had stood up. Her small hands were clenched into fists. A guard stepped forward. "Sit down, child. This is—" "Your Honor!" Veronica repeated louder. Judge Fausto frowned. "What is the meaning of this?" The little girl stepped forward. Her steps trembled, but her eyes were steady. "I have an offer." The courtroom fell silent. Lawyers looked on in shock. Reporters readied their pens. Ramiro watched his daughter, his heart frozen. Judge Fausto leaned forward. "An offer? This is a courtroom, child, not a playground." "I know," Veronica said calmly, "but I can make you walk. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then laughter exploded. Laughter filled the courtroom. Lawyers laughed. Reporters laughed. Even the guards smiled. A woman whispered loudly, "Poor thing's lost her mind." Another man mocked, "Then make him dance while you're at it." Even Judge Fausto showed a cold smile. "Child, I've been paralyzed for 15 years. The world's best doctors looked at me. They all failed." His voice was hard, merciless. "Your little offer changes nothing." But Veronica didn't back down. Her eyes held tears, but her voice was still strong. "If I make you walk, will you free my father?" Silence fell again. This time, nobody laughed, because there was something in that little girl's face. It wasn't innocence, it was burning faith. Judge Fausto's face hardened. "You have 2 minutes, he finally said. "Show me this impossible miracle, and when you fail, you'll learn that justice can't be bought with tears and children's tricks." A heavy silence descended on the courtroom. Not even the most mocking dared to laugh in that moment, because the little girl's gaze carried something different, and somehow everyone held their breath, as if something invisible was about to happen. Veronica walked forward slowly. Small steps, trembling hands, but steady eyes. Her father sobbed in the defendant's chair. "Daughter, don't humiliate yourself for me." But Veronica didn't turn back. She approached the wheelchair, dropped to her knees. The cold marble floor pierced her thin skin, but she didn't care. She placed her small hands on Judge Fausto's motionless knees and closed her eyes. Her lips moved, soft words, almost like a child's prayer. The tension in the courtroom was crushing. All eyes were on her, some mocking, some disbelieving, a few pitying. But nobody believed. Nobody dared even imagine this could be real. A man in the back rows called out mockingly, "Come on, miracle worker, make the judge dance." Laughter exploded through the room again. Some clapped, some whistled, as if they were at a cheap show. The laughter echoed off the marble walls like cruel hammer blows. The judge, though he remained stern, wasn't laughing. His eyes were half closed. He was evaluating the girl with a mixture of contempt and something deeper, a remnant of doubt, a shadow of hope. He didn't even know himself. But Veronica didn't waver. Her lips continued to whisper. Her small, broken voice carried more power than any rehearsed speech. This was pure, innocent, burning faith. Suddenly, the judge raised an eyebrow and let out a dry, harsh laugh, cold as steel. "This is pathetic." Nothing happened. A child trying to play miracle worker in a serious court. His laughter was a signal for everyone else to burst into even louder laughter. A woman shook her head and said loud enough for all to hear, "Poor thing will grow up traumatized from this farce." The girl's heart seemed to shatter into pieces. The tears she'd fought to hold back now flowed as she looked around, and all she saw were mocking smiles, contemptuous looks, pointing fingers. Her father tried to stand in desperation, shouting, "Stop this, she's just a child." But the guards pushed him back onto the defendant's bench, held him firmly. Ramiro wept, helpless, crushed by his daughter's humiliation. The girl slowly rose. Her legs trembled. Her face flushed red with shame. She tried to breathe, but the lump in her throat choked her. She looked at her father with eyes full of tears, like someone asking forgiveness for failing to save him. The crowd laughed louder. Reporters wrote greedily. The judge cleared his throat and struck the gavel on wood, restored order with his iron voice. "Enough of this farce. Moving to the verdict." In that moment, Veronica understood the full weight of cruelty. Her sincere attempt to save her father had been turned into a spectacle, into a reason for mockery. But fate, silent, was only preparing to turn the page. The courtroom was still caught in cruel laughter when Veronica, defeated, began to walk away. Her faded blue dress swayed slightly as she stumbled on her own steps, trying to escape the humiliation. Hot tears streamed down her face, dripping onto the cold marble, as if marking the floor with her pain. Ramiro, imprisoned in the defendant's chair, desperately cried out, "Veronica, my daughter, don't leave me!" But his voice was drowned by the courtroom's noise, the poisonous whispers, the reporters' pens recording every detail of the scene. Judge Fausto adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath, ready to reclaim his merciless posture. He picked up the verdict sheet, raised his firm voice. "Ramiro Sandoval is sentenced to 10 years in prison." He didn't finish. Something strange passed through his body. First, a slight pressure in his chest, as if the air had grown denser. Then, a barely noticeable tingling ran through his right calf. Fausto stopped for a second, frowned. Impossible, he thought. 15 years since the accident, 15 years feeling absolutely nothing from the waist down. He took a deep breath, tried to convince himself this was just fatigue, a psychological illusion created by that child's words, but the tingling intensified. Now it felt like a soft warmth, then a real pulse. Fausto gripped the armrests of the chair. His knuckles went white, his heart began to race. Meanwhile, nobody noticed. The room was still laughing. Some were joking. Others were already preparing to leave, certain they'd witnessed only a child's farce. But Fausto knew something was happening. He carefully wiggled his toes inside his shoe. And for the first time in a decade and a half, something responded. It was just a small spasm, a barely noticeable movement, but real. His eyes widened. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. It can't be. Not here, not now, he muttered to himself. He tried to pull himself together, cleared his throat, but his trembling hand betrayed his alarm. His eyes, once cold as stone, now carried something new. Fear. Veronica, still near the door, stopped, as if she felt something. She slowly turned around. Her tear-filled eyes met the judge's. For a moment, silence gripped the room. The cruel laughter stopped, not because they noticed what was happening, but because an inexplicable tension filled the air. A heavy, dense silence, as if everyone sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. Fausto took a deep breath, tried to maintain composure, but deep down he knew. That girl's promise wasn't just a desperate phrase. Something impossible was awakening inside him. Silence hung heavily in the courtroom. The laughter that had echoed seconds before had turned into confused whispers. Judge Fausto, always so unyielding, seemed different. His hands trembled slightly over the dark wood of the bench. A drop of sweat rolled down his wrinkled forehead. Veronica, standing by the door, continued to stare at him. Her eyes, still full of tears, now carried something more. Hope. As if the girl sensed before everyone else that her promise hadn't been in vain. Suddenly, the sound of scraping metal echoed through the room. It was quick, almost imperceptible. But some noticed. The judge's legs moved. "Sir, did you see that?" muttered a reporter in the first row, lowering his camera in disbelief. "It can't be," whispered a woman, squeezing her husband's hand beside her. The guards at the defendant's bench looked on in confusion. Even Ramiro, the girl's father, suddenly lifted his head, his eyes wide, as if a spark had pierced his weary soul. Fausto, in shock, tried to hide it, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, but his voice failed when he tried to continue the verdict. "Ramiro Sandoval is hereby." He stopped. The tingling was now undeniable. The warm sensation was slowly rising through his legs, something he'd forgotten what it felt like. His knees, once motionless as stone, began responding with short spasms. The audience, previously disbelieving, now leaned forward with wide eyes. The room that had seemed so full of mockery minutes before was now gripped by absolute tension. Nobody dared to laugh. Veronica took a few steps forward. Her childlike but firm voice echoed through the room. "I said the judge would walk." The girl's words cut through the air like an invisible blade. The judge tried to ignore it, but his body betrayed him. He gripped the armrests of the wheelchair with such force that his nails almost scratched the polished wood. His breathing quickened. This is impossible," he muttered quietly. But his voice was picked up by the microphones placed throughout the courtroom. Now there was no doubt. Something extraordinary was happening. A deathly silence gripped the room, but it wasn't empty. This was a silence full of expectation, as if everyone was ready to witness the impossible. And at the center of it all, a girl just 7 years old, in a simple dress with shining eyes, looking at the judge with unwavering faith. Faith that few adults in the world could sustain. The entire courtroom held its breath. What had before seemed only childish audacity was now transforming into a spectacle of collective amazement. All eyes were fixed on Judge Fausto, the stern and unyielding man who hadn't risen from that wheelchair in 15 years. His body trembled, sweat streamed down his harsh face. He tried to maintain his posture, tried to hold on to his authority, but he couldn't control what was happening. The muscles of his legs, so long dormant, were responding with involuntary contractions. The dry sound of wood echoed when his right leg struck the base of the chair. A cry of shock ran through the room. "He moved!" someone exclaimed too loudly to ignore. The reporters' cameras began clicking in sequence, recording every moment. Journalists who minutes before had mocked the girl now fought for the best position. Fausto tightly closed his eyes, as if he could deny reality. But when he opened them again, he couldn't hide the terror on his face. The impossible was before him. Veronica, the little girl, approached another step. Her sweet but firm voice echoed clearly in the absolute silence. "I said the judge could still walk." Fausto tried to speak, but his throat constricted. His hand trembled when he tried to lean on the armrest of the chair. For a moment it seemed the entire world had stopped. Then, with visible effort, he began to lift his body. The metallic creak of the wheelchair echoed like thunder. The entire courtroom suddenly stood in a mixture of disbelief and awe. With each centimeter the judge rose, disbelief transformed into absolute amazement. When he could finally stand, the silence was broken by a collective gasp. Fausto, trembling, leaning on the table before him, looked at his legs as if facing a miracle impossible to accept. 15 years, he muttered almost soundlessly. 15 years. Tears he would never have allowed himself in public now flowed freely. The spectators, previously cruel and mocking, were in shock. Many covered their mouths with their hands, others wept openly. The girl's father, Ramiro, let out a cry of relief. Tears rolled down his weary face, and at the center of that inexplicable spectacle, Veronica smiled. Not with arrogance. With the calm of someone who knew from the very beginning that faith could challenge even the firmest convictions. This wasn't just a courtroom that morning. It was the scene of something nobody would ever forget. The entire courtroom was in absolute silence. Judge Fausto, the man who for years had been a symbol of harshness and coldness, stood before everyone, still trembling, still leaning on the table. His eyes, once cold as marble, were now filled with tears, reflecting the shock and vulnerability of someone whose life had just been turned upside down. He tried to speak, but his voice came out broken. This is impossible," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. Veronica, just 7 years old, looked at him with the same calm she'd carried from the beginning. "It's possible, Your Honor, but only if you believe in what's right." Simple words from a child pierced Fausto's hardened heart like an arrow. The man who'd become a prisoner of skepticism and arrogance now faced not just a physical miracle, but an even greater moral truth. His entire life, built on coldness and inflexible rules, was crumbling before a girl's innocent faith. The spectators who'd previously mocked were now crying silently. Many dropped to their knees in awe, unable to explain what they'd witnessed. The reporters, previously hungry for scandals, now recorded every tear, every gesture, realizing they were before an event that would go down in history. Ramiro, the accused father, rose from the defendant's chair, the handcuffs still on his wrists. His gaze met his daughter's. In his eyes were only pride and gratitude. He didn't need to say anything. Her courage spoke for both of them. Fausto took a deep breath, wiped his tears, looked at the girl. "Veronica," he said in a trembling voice but filled with something new, "you taught me something no law book ever could." Then he turned to the room and with a voice strength that surprised everyone declared, "Ramiro Sandoval is acquitted of all charges. This court will be remembered not as another trial, but as the day justice found truth in a child's heart." Deafening applause engulfed the courtroom. Police, reporters, ordinary citizens, everyone stood up, breaking the strict protocol of this place. Ramiro fell to his knees, weeping with relief. Veronica ran to him and they embraced under the applause, a simple and powerful scene, the perfect image of love and faith's victory over the law's coldness. As for Judge Fausto, nobody ever saw him the same way again. The man who for so long represented merciless severity had now become a symbol of a miracle and transformation that went beyond his legs beginning to move again. That day, everyone understood a profound truth. It wasn't just the judge's body that was healed. His soul was healed too. 3 months later, Judge Marcus Fausto still sat at the bench. But he wasn't the same man anymore. The wheelchair was still there. But most days he didn't use it. He walked to court, slowly, carefully, but he walked. And most importantly, he smiled. People noticed the change. His rulings were still just, but now they were merciful. He still knew the law, but now he had a heart too. One day, during a closed session, a young lawyer asked, Your Honor, what really happened that day? How did you walk? Fausto looked out the window, smiled quietly. I don't know, he said honestly. The doctors call it psychogenic paralysis, long dormant nerves reawakening. He paused. The explosion didn't sever all my nerves, but 15 years of trauma, pain, loss created a mental block. He turned to the lawyer. The brain, trying to protect me, shut down the connection, and I lived in that prison for 15 years. His voice grew softer. But that little girl, her faith, somehow broke through the walls, not just in my body, in my mind, in my soul. He paused again. You see, before I was a judge, before the wheelchair, before the bitterness, I was Colonel Fausto, and I used to pray. Before every convoy, before every mission. His eyes filled. But after the explosion, I stopped. I lost my faith, and I think that's when I really lost my legs. The lawyer nodded, his eyes welling up. And Veronica? Did you see her again? Fausto smiled. Every week, she brings her father to the courthouse, but this time as a visitor. And every time she reminds me of the same thing. Nothing is impossible, he said quietly. Only faithless people. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. And tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone with a hidden past? Thanks for watching.